it's entitled Real Indians. Though I have focused on language, it is important to see that making visible and recognizable who we are and what we are doing always requires more than language. The language itself doesn't help you appear having a certain identity or being somebody. We have other factors, other values, other principles. In other words, who we are and what we are doing always requires more than language. This is what we mean by extra-linguistic factors. It requires as well that we act, think, value, and interact in ways that together with language render who we are and what we are doing recognizable to others. So, the language is not enough. We have to have other values, other principles that are changeable from a society into another society in order to help you have a certain identity. In fact, to be a particular who and to pull off a particular what requires that we act, value, interact, and use language in sync with or in coordination with other people and with various objects in appropriate locations and at appropriate times. In other words, the language itself is not enough. We have to behave in a certain way sometimes in addition to the language that can only help you appear having a given identity. To see this wider notion of language as integrated with other stuff means other factors rather than the language, together with the language can help you appear in a certain way. We will briefly consider Wilder and Blatt's fascinating work on how Native Americans recognize each other as really Indian. They are really Indian, real Indians. The language is not enough. They have to behave in a given way, in addition to the language, that can help you be recognized as a Native American. If you use their language, this is not enough. They have some values, some principles that you have to adopt in order to be held to appear as real Indian. The term real Indian is, of course, an insider's term. If I say, you are real Indian, this means that you have to have some characteristics. It is not only the language, but other behaviors. The term real Indian, this is what we mean by other stuff, rather than the language that can help you have some identities. The term real Indian is, of course, an insider's term. The fact that it is used by some Native Americans in enacting their own identity work doesn't license non-Native Americans to use the term. If you are non-Native Americans, and even if you speak the same language, that doesn't authorize you, give you the chance, give you the right to say that you are real Indian. The problem of recognition and being recognized is very consequential and problematic for Native Americans. While in order to be considered a real Indian, notice, one must be able to make some claims to kinship. Kinship is important. Even kinship is not enough. Some claims to kinship with others who are recognized as real Indians. This, by no means, settles the matter. Even kinship is not enough to give you the right to say that you are real Indian. In other words, language itself is not enough. Kinship is not enough, so we are talking about values. Once you have, in addition to the language, in addition to the kinship, yes, then you could be recognized as real Indian. This by no means settles the matter. People with such biological kinship, this is what we mean by kinship, ties can fail to get recognized as a real Indian. And people of mixed kinship, notice, some people of mixed kinship can can be considered as real Indian simply because they have some values, some behaviors, some principles that they have to have in order to be claimed that they are real Indian. And people of mixed kinship can be so recognized. Being a real Indian is not something one can simply be. Rather, it is something that one becomes in, and through the doing of it, that is in carrying out the actual performance itself. So, real Indian is not just a term, it is not just a language, it is not just a kinship, it is a behavior that you have to behave. You have to behave, you have to adopt in order to be recognized, in order to have the right to claim that you are real Indians. This is what I mean by the beginning of the lecture, that language is not enough. If I speak Arabic, this is not enough to say that I am an Arab. I have to behave according to our culture, our values, our principles. In addition to the language, of course, all of these will play a role in helping me projecting myself, introducing myself as an Arab. It is just an example from me in order to help you understand. Many times we say that that person is that thing only in the name. This means that yes, he might be considered a sportman because he plays in that team. We say it is only in the name he is a sportman, but in the behavior he is not. Why? Because, for example, he doesn't have a good spirit, sport spirit. He, let me say, is not that good at playing. So you have to behave in a way, you have to be good at carrying out something in order to be able to be recognized according to the title you wish to have. This is what I mean. Sometimes you might say, are you a teacher? أنت مدرس? Of course he is a teacher as a title. But why we say that? Because he doesn't behave in a way that can reflect his being a teacher. For example, being good, being nice, being kind, being friendly, being good at his major. So this is what I mean by to be a real Indian. It's not just a kinship. It is not just a title. You have to behave in a certain way in order to be, or to have the right to be claimed that you are real Indian. Though one must have certain kinship ties to get in the game, beyond this entry criterion, there is no being a real Indian. Rather, there is only doing, being, or becoming a real Indian. This means the behavior. Doing, you have to play the role of a teacher in order to be a teacher, or to be acclaimed as a teacher. Finally, doing, being, and becoming a real Indian is not something that one can do all by oneself. It requires the participation of others. One cannot be a real Indian unless one appropriately recognizes real Indians and get recognized by others as a real Indian in the practices of doing, being, and becoming a real Indian. All of this indeed says what I have said. To be a teacher is not a title. It is the language that you use of the teacher, of a good teacher, of a real teacher, to be claimed that you are teacher. You have to behave as a teacher, being nice, being gentle, being kind, for example. And this is what we mean by finally doing, being, and becoming a real Indian is not something that one can do all by oneself. There are a multitude of ways one can do being and becoming a real Indian. Some of these are real Indians, for example, prefer to avoid. Notice, I'm talking about the behavior. If you, in the kinship, a real Indian, an Indian. If you, in the language, are an Indian, this is not enough to say that you are a real Indian. Real Indians, so I'm talking about values now, principles that they have to have. Real Indians prefer to avoid conversation with strangers. So, if in the kinship I am an Indian, if in the language I am an Indian, but I do speak to foreigners, outsiders, this contradicts one of our values, so you do not have the right to say that you are real Indian. Exactly, if I claim that I am a teacher, but I do not behave in a good way, so then I will not be recognized as a teacher because I haven't yet adopted the good behavior of the teacher, being nice with his students, being kind and helpful, for example. So one of the principles of real Indians is to avoid speaking to strangers. If you do, this means that you contradict one of their values. So the language is not enough, the kinship is not enough. This stuff is very much important in addition to the language and in addition to the kinship. They cannot be related to one another. Real Indians prefer to avoid conversation with strangers. So for real Indians, any conversation they do have with a stranger who may turn out to be a real Indian, will in the discovery of the others Indianness establish substantial good obligations between the conversational partners just through the mutual acknowledgement that they are Indians and that they are now no longer strangers to one another in their search for the other's real Indianness and in their display of their own Indianness. Real Indians frequently engage in a distinctive form of verbal sparring by correctly responding to and correctly engaging in this sparring, which Indians call raising. Each participant further establishes cultural competency in the eyes of the other. In other words, let me make it as simple as possible, but what is written here is very much important. If I'm speaking with a stranger, then I will not be recognized as a real Indian. If then later the real Indians who have judged me not to be a real Indian find out that the people I'm talking to are not strangers but also Indians, then they will change their mind and then I will be recognized as a real Indian. Everything written in here is very much important. I would like to thank you all students, and inshallah have a nice day. Thank you.